Hi, I'm Sarah and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about some books that make me think of summer. Some of these books are books that I read during the summer and therefore I associate them with summer. Others are books that are set during the summer and just have like a warm, relaxing on the beach feel. The weather here has been absolutely terrible. I live in the Scottish Highlands and yeah, the last week has been like torrential rain on and off. So it's really making me want to pick up warmer books and hope for better weather. So I have a list of 10 books here. When I was looking through books that I could recommend, I came up with a list of like 30. So if you like this video, please let me know and I can definitely make part 2 and maybe even a part 3 because yeah, I have so many good summary books. Okay, so the first book is a book that I don't actually own physically, and that's Stories of the Sahara by Sanmao. This is a book that I took out of my library last year just randomly because I had been looking through their catalogue online and it's a really striking cover. And then when I looked it up, the reviews on Goodreads were amazing. It was getting like 4.3 stars or something. And this is basically a series of essays by Sanmao, who I think she was a Chinese writer, an artist who moved to Spain, sort of to travel and just experience new cultures. And then once she moved there, she met her husband, and together they moved to the Spanish Sahara. So I knew nothing really about the Spanish Sahara going into this, and it's sort of, I guess it's interconnected essays where she's talking about her time living there and the challenges she faces, but each essay in itself is like a sort of like episode, and these are just amazing. Like, it really shows you what life was like as well, one as a foreigner living in the Sahara, and because she's actually a double foreigner almost, because there are a lot of like at this point the Spanish occupy the Sahara, so there are European people in the Sahara, but she's obviously Chinese and she doesn't speak the local language. She does speak Spanish, so she's almost like doubly estranged. But these essays are just really positive. She manages to really get to grips with the local culture. She talks a lot about learning to drive, and she goes on these huge drives through the desert. And it did not make me want to move there because it seems like a very isolated place. But I just loved her essays. Are really funny. This was written in the 70s, and sadly, after she wrote this, her husband died, and I think in a diving accident, and then she committed suicide about 5 years later. So it's like, I guess, quite a sad story, but this is so full of life considering it was written like 50 years ago. I just really fell in love with this collection. I don't know if there are any other collections by her translated into English because this was originally written in Mandarin, I think. But if there is, I would definitely pick up anything else she's written because I just loved it, and it just really, it's set in a hot country. There was a real sense of freedom about it, her driving through the desert in a big jeep, so I would highly recommend this one. Next is a book which is both set during summer, I believe, and I read it on holiday in Greece in July in 2022. So this is like doubly associated with summer for me, and that's Extinction by Bernhard. So this book is not your classic summer holiday read, I wouldn't say. This is about a young man who finds out that both of his parents have died in an accident, and he's living in Rome, and it's during the summer, and he has to travel back to Austria to attend their funeral. And for about a third of this book, I thought it was like really, like the action was going to kick off when he got home, but it's actually just very slow and very descriptive. And he gets home and he doesn't have a great relationship with his family, but all of the thoughts really like lead into one another. It takes about 300 pages to get to the point where they're even at the funeral, and it's just so slow and descriptive. But there's something about Thomas Bernhard's writing. It's all basically like it's not one sentence, but there are no paragraph breaks at all in the whole thing. And I just found this so entrancing. I think because when you're on holiday you have more time to read, that I was just sitting and reading like 50 pages at a time of like completely unbroken text, but I was loving it. I was loving all of the details it goes into. It's very like angsty tone, but the writing's so beautiful. It's just so descriptive. I think this is a good one to read if you have a little bit more time, because I think it definitely benefits from you reading large chunks in one go. So that's why I think this one's great for summer. Next, this is a very classic summery book. Is A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. I got this out of my library last year, and this book is so slim. It's about 100 pages, and it's just the most summery book you can imagine. So it's about this man who goes to a small village in the English countryside, and he is there to uncover a mural that is on the church wall and to restore it. This is set just after the First World War, and the man has been a soldier during World War One, and he's definitely suffering from PTSD. But it's just about a month of him being in this village, getting to know the people, and at the same time uncovering this mural. I just thought it was such a beautiful little book. It just touches on art, it touches on love, and the fact that it's only set during 1 month and then you know he's going to leave. I think that that's why it really works, the fact it's a short book, because quite often I come away from a short book feeling, I think, does it need to be that length? Because I feel like I could have read more. But this, I feel like the length was perfect, because it really is just a small chapter of his life, and then as soon as he leaves the village it makes sense for it to stop. So this is definitely a perfect summer read for me. Next I have a book which I read a couple of years ago and I've never heard anyone else really talking about, and that's Oldladyvoice by Elisa Victoria. This is a Spanish book in translation, and it's about a young girl, I think she's like 5 or 6, and her mum is not well, and she knows that her mum's not well, and she gets sent to stay with her grandmother for the summer. So this is set in the south of Spain in summer. It's like really like hot, sweaty feel to it. They have their siestas and stuff in the afternoon because it's so warm outside, and in this book is a child narrator, which I don't always love, but she's just so funny, and she knows so much more of what's going on than people give her credit for. She's really obsessed with sex and violence, but not in a way that is unbelievable. Like, at the same time, like, the relationship with her grandmother is just so beautiful. The writing in this is great, and it just really evokes that like hot, sweaty summer in the south of Spain feel. So I'd highly recommend this one. Then I have a book that I read at university. So I studied French and Spanish at university, so I read this in French, and this is Amelie Nothomb's Stupeur et Tremblement. I think in English it's called Fear and Trembling, and this is a very classic book to read at university if you study French, because, well, for one, it's really short and the writing's quite easy to get through. Also, there's been a film adaptation of it, and she's a very well-known Belgian author. She has lots and lots of books, and she's just a really quirky character. Like, I'll see if I can find a photo of her. She's always got this like massive hat on. This book reminds me of summer because it's about a young girl who travels from France to Japan to work in a big sort of like salaryman type company, like a big corporate business, as sort of an intern, I think, and it all just goes terribly wrong. So I think books about people starting a new job just having left university always make me think of sort of the end of summer. But this book is just really quirky, like, it's so short, but I feel like it really evokes that feeling of not fitting in somewhere and trying your best, but every time you try to make it better you just make it worse. So yeah, I would definitely recommend picking this one up. I would really like to read more by this author. I've only read one other book by her, and it was Strange. I know that she's got a lot of books that she's written that are like letters to herself, and you know, she's definitely like a quirky author, so I'd like to read a bit more. Then I have a book, well, this is really more of a short story that I read in summer last year, and that's Death in Venice by Thomas Mann. I thought this short story is so good. Like, it's set in Venice, obviously, during a really hot summer, and sort of halfway through the story a plague breaks out and everyone sort of starts to leave. So it's that sort of strange, it's a really hot summer, but it's not a happy story. It's also about desire. This older man who goes to this fancy hotel is really attracted by this young sort of 16-year-old boy, and he becomes sort of obsessed with him. So it's quite a dark story, but it's just so beautifully evokes that like Italian hot summer. So I'd highly recommend that. It's also only about 70 pages, so you could definitely read it in a day at the beach. So yeah, I would recommend. Next I have a book that I read a few years ago, and that's Diary of a Film by Niven Govinden. I never read anything else by this author, but this one was really great. It's set in the south of France at a film festival. I don't think it explicitly says which film festival, but I guess you're meant to assume it's a Cannes film festival. And the main character is a film director, and his film is up for an award at the festival, and it's sort of about his relationship to the protagonists of the film, their relationships with each other, and then there's a side story about him trying to find a subject for his next film. Then there's a lot of him wandering around the streets of this sort of hot French city, reflecting on how great a time he had making the film and also the difficulties of it, and then looking towards what this new film could be about. And there's a lot about sort of appropriation of people's stories. So the woman that he wants to speak to sort of take her story maybe doesn't want that story to be made into a film. So it's quite interesting. I've never read a book about this subject matter, and I really like when a book sort of deep dives into something that you maybe just don't really think about. Like I've never really considered the post-production of a film, so it was just a really interesting read, and I would really like to get to some of his other books, but I'm not really sure what to go to next. Next I have a book that is again very summery, so that's I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. I really don't like this cover. I don't like this girl. She's kind of freaky. I read this a few years ago, and this is set sort of really during the summer. It is about this family who live in this big sort of abandoned, dilapidated castle, but they don't actually have any money, so they're really poor, but it's not, but they're sort of happy with it. They find ways to make a little bit of money, and it's written from the point of view of this, I think she's a 17-year-old girl, and it's about her sister falling in love with this American man that moves into the village, and it's just such a great book where the character is in her late teens. She's sort of on the cusp between childhood and adulthood. There's this really great scene where she's doing all of these pagan rituals in midsummer, and it's just such a great summary book. The narrator is so funny, the characters are also quirky. Yeah, I just highly recommend. Next I have Real Life by Brandon Taylor. This book was huge when it came out. I think it came out in 2020 maybe, and it was longlisted and maybe also shortlisted for the Booker Prize in the year it came out. This is a book about a Black postgraduate student living in the States, and it's sort of set during basically a long weekend in his summer, and it's about all of the microaggressions that he experiences being a Black postgraduate student, but also he's got a grant to be a student, so he's not as well off as some of the other PhD students. It's about his friendships, his sexual relationships. He's a gay man, and this just feels like a really hot bank holiday weekend where you meet up with friends and everything all blurs into one another. He goes and he plays squash, and then he goes to the lab, and it's just following his weekend, but it's just so, it touches on so much. It's all about how the little things that people say can build up to give you the impression that you're not welcome or you don't fit in. This is a really, really powerful read, I thought. And then I thought I'd finish with a classic that definitely feels very summery to me, and that's Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. I mean, I love Jane Austen. This is one of my favourite books by her. I know that that's not a popular opinion. Quite a lot of people don't like this book because the main character, Fanny, is quite different from a lot of Jane Austen's protagonists. She's definitely more quiet and unsure of herself. She lets other people speak out and she sort of sits back. But what I loved about this book is that I had no idea where it was going to go, and I feel like with the sort of romance book that Jane Austen writes, you normally have a good idea of what's going to happen, and I was really unsure. And there were some like plot twists in this where I was just like, whoa, I did not see that coming, which is very unusual, I think, for a classic to be able to, yeah, sort of surprise you. But this really, I think it is set during the summer, but there's a big part of it where Fanny and her cousins and their friends all put on this big production of a play, and they spend weeks rehearsing it. And that to me just feels like such a summery activity when you've got loads of spare time as a sort of young adult or teenager. You can just put on a big production of a play with your friends. But yeah, I would like, this is a bit of a longer book for Jane Austen, but I think it's definitely worth a read. And yeah, it's a classic that's definitely stuck with me. I read quite a lot of classics, and some of them, maybe like a year later, I couldn't tell you that much of what happened, whereas a lot of this has really stayed with me. Not necessarily what happens, but just some of the scenes and the feel of the book have really stuck with me. So those are 10 books that I would really recommend for reading during the summer. I'm going to make a video that will be out next week talking about my summer TBR, because I like to curate a little list of books that I plan to pick up during the summer. So yeah, stay tuned if you'd like to see that.